With the coming of evening, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let us cross over to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him just as he was in the boat. And there were other boats with him. Then it began to blow, a gale, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that it was almost swamped. But he was in the stern, his head on the cushion, asleep. They woke him and said to him, "Master, do you not care? We are going down." And he woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Quiet now, be calm." And the wind dropped, and all was calm again. Then he said to them, "Why are you so frightened? How is it that you have no faith?" They were filled with awe and said to one another, "Who can this be? Even the wind and the sea obey him." The Sea of Galilee, a freshwater lake in the region of Galilee, surrounded by many little towns, Capernaum, Bethsaida. These are some of the places we hear often associated with Jesus' ministry, and they often took place around the Sea of Galilee. It is also the scene for today's gospel reading. Perhaps if you have visited the Sea of Galilee in one of your pilgrimages, often also called the Lake of Galilee, you would have perhaps seen the lake or the Sea of Galilee on better days, perhaps more serene and calm. But this Sea of Galilee is a lake that is geographically below sea level, and therefore it is surrounded by sweeping hills to its right and left, and north and south as well. And therefore, when the winds gush down, it can suddenly turn into a gale or strong wind that trickles a storm in the middle of the lake. And this is what we find happening in the gospel reading today, my dear friends. We find the disciples struggling in the midst of a storm. And where is Jesus? He is sound asleep. Well, Jesus has had a heavy day. If you look at the gospel readings that precede this event, Jesus indeed had a full day. He began the day in the morning in the synagogue, and then went about healing the sick. He could find a little time in Peter's house, but the crowd followed him from the synagogue to the house, and in the evening Jesus came out again and he healed more people who were sick, and then finished the day with parables. By this time, Jesus was already on the lake, the ship or the boat rather, pushed a little from shore. The crowd had followed him from morning till evening. No wonder perhaps at the end of the day, Jesus collapses in fatigue, tired, asleep. He knocks off on the stern. But his heart is calm. The disposition of his heart and the confidence that surrounds him is a calmness in providence. While Jesus' heart is calm, what about the disciples? Jesus had directed them, let's make the crossing. And it's in the evening after sunset. Darkness will come. But they are regular to the sea. They know these waters. Even then, the disciples were not prepared for the storm that will come. And rightly so, in the middle of the lake somewhere, as they were making the crossing, a storm comes and the waves toss the boat. They are terrified. And that is why they say, "Master, we are going down." But fear also brings a lack of faith. And so they say, Master, do you not care? Fear and faithlessness, the two things we see in the disciples today. And so you find Jesus wakes up and he commands the wind and the sea, and they calm down. Be quiet, calm down. In fact, the gospel reading polishes the words very kindly to us. The original Greek word would be very, very hard, to the extent of saying, shut up. That's how strong the words are. Shh. Imperative command. And the wind dies. The sea is calm. Now the disciples are looking at Jesus and they ask, who is this that the wind and the sea can obey him? First, they are terrified, then faithless, now they are flabbergasted, amazed. Who is this that the wind and the sea can obey him? The gospel reading finishes with that question. Who is this that the wind and the sea obey him? It's a question that hovers over the gospel, and Mark doesn't give us an answer. It's for us to figure out. So we take away two things, my dear friends, if I can propose, from the readings we heard today. That question, who is this that the wind and the sea obey him? That question must be answered if we ought to finish this gospel well. And Mark, in his gospel, leaves us different clues sprinkled around the gospel. When Jesus asks his disciples, who do you say I am? The answer comes, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. At the end, when Jesus is on the cross and he's pierced, that centurion will look at him and say, truly, this man was the Son of God. Then again, when Jesus raised the paralyzed man, but to prove to you that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins, I tell you, take up your mat and go home. All these are signs that Mark leaves in the gospel to tell us who is this that the wind and the sea obey him. That Jesus shares the same divinity and authority that God speaks, as it were in the first reading, when God speaks in the midst of the storm. If you heard the first reading, my dear friends, a very short reading, but it's packed with power. Who limits the sea? Who sets boundaries to storms? Who says, this is your boundary, do not cross? It comes from the book of Job, and you hear God speaking from the tempest. And it is in that same light today's gospel is found. Jesus speaks, be quiet, calm down. And the storm goes away. So the first question is this, who is this that the wind and the sea obey? Jesus, the Son of God. Then we come to the second thought for today, my dear friends. For many of us, this story holds volumes of the countless situations we find ourselves in too. For we too face our own storms. Storms when difficult things happen in our life. Storms when we feel that we are drowning. Storms when God seems absent or not caring enough, unconcerned. In these moments, the absence of God speaks volume for us. We feel helpless. And we wish, my dear friends, that just like today's gospel, we would find Jesus rescuing us. Perhaps our question would be the same. Master, do you not care? We are going down. People say this aloud. People say this in silent tears. People say this in the murmur of prayer. Very ordinary human condition and struggle. And in this context, how we wish God is a rescuing God who comes in, who sweeps us, rescues our situation. The idea of a rescuing God comes from a very old practice. The ancient Greeks had theatre as part of their life. And in the stories that you see in Greek theatre, when the hero or the protagonist is going through some difficulty, the backstage crew would use a crane to send an actor, as it were a divine person, onto the stage, and then that divine person, as it were, will rescue the situation. So that lowering from the backstage, a crane will come onto the main stage, bringing this person down, and then it's as it were that the gods rescue the protagonist or the hero. Many years later, a German philosopher, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, used this idea and said, God is like machine, the machine that the backstage people use as a crane to lower down. He comes down and rescues people from their difficulty, and he goes off. And he used this Latin term, Deus ex machina, God from machine. That same mode of working, How sometimes we feel this Deus ex machina is our solution to our many problems. God who comes in and bails us out. God who comes in and turns a situation around for us. God who comes in and works on our favor. Yeah. Not specifically turn around an issue, but sometimes, more than often, work on our favor, Cite me. But life is not so simple, right? Life is not like this. Our problems don't disappear. We sit through and tomorrow we wake up, it's still there. Our difficulties are still there. But the image that we take from today's gospel is Jesus asleep on the stern. His heart calm, trusting in providence. And how do we grapple with this, How do we reconcile these two images? Our struggling lives, our lives that sometimes get into the storms, and Jesus who is asleep in the stern. This is a perennial problem, but the gospel wants us to see something deeper that associates us with what is happening in the gospel reading. Mark is inviting us to shift our glance, not to look at the storm, but to look at the one who quietened the storm. Yes, the storm is big. The storm is real. It's painful. We become fearful. And we become sometimes even doubtful. It is real. But Mark wants us to see this. People of faith look at things in different ways. Mark wants us to look at the one who calmed the storm. He wants us to recognize that faith is not about problems disappearing, but living with all the questions that we have. Holding on to God, but asking the difficult questions of life and moving slowly with God. Knowing that at every line of the gospel, when the gospel tells us, and God is with you, Jesus is with us. And that is the reality that today's gospel tells us. The image of Jesus asleep on the stern is the image of confidence that God is above the storms. Well, He may not be a rescuing God. More often you find Him a redeeming God. A God who walks with us, thick and thin, pain, suffering, struggle, trial, and then bringing us back after all that calamity and the struggles of life. God who walks with us. Mark wants us to ask those difficult questions. Where are you? We are going down. Can't you see? Difficult questions. and to know Jesus is with us still. That is people of faith. Let's think about this, dear friends.